Venezuela is ordering a massive mobilization.
November 16th, 2025. The USS Gerald R. Ford crossed into the Caribbean Sea. Within hours, Venezuela mobilized 200,000 troops. America's most advanced aircraft carrier versus an entire nation preparing for war. What happened next wasn't what anyone expected. This is the story of a $13 billion warship that sailed within striking distance of Venezuela's coast, and how the crisis that followed changed military strategy in the Western Hemisphere. By the end, you'll understand why both sides walked away claiming victory, and why neither side actually won. Let's break it down. The USS Gerald R. Ford isn't just big. It's a floating Air Force base that carries more firepower than some countries' entire militaries. 100,000 tons, 1,100 feet long, $13 billion. But size isn't what makes the Ford dangerous. It's what it carries. 75 aircraft, F/A-18 Super Hornets that can hit targets 500 miles away, F-35C stealth fighters that enemy radar can't see, E-2D Hawkeye surveillance planes that track everything within 250 miles. When the Ford shows up, it doesn't come alone. Two destroyers sailed with it, USS Bainbridge and USS Mahon, both packed with Tomahawk cruise missiles and defensive systems designed to shoot down multiple threats at once. The Ford wasn't making a social call to Venezuela. Operation Southern Spear. That's what the Pentagon named it. The official mission? Stop drug trafficking from South America into the United States. Venezuela saw it differently. For months before the Ford arrived, the U.S. had been hitting boats in the Caribbean. 22 vessels struck since September. 83 people dead. The Trump administration called them narco-terrorists. Venezuela called it an act of war. When the Ford entered the Caribbean on November 11th, Venezuelan military commanders knew what it meant. The boat strikes were testing defenses. The Ford was the real threat. Regime change was coming. Or at least, that's what they believed. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez went on state TV with a simple message. Every military unit in Venezuela was now on maximum alert. Army, Air Force, Navy, coastal defenses, missile units, plus the Bolivarian militia, civilians trained for exactly this scenario. 200,000 people mobilized in under 48 hours. But here's what made this different from other military standoffs. The Ford could actually back up the threat. This wasn't posturing. The weapons systems were real, the strike range was immediate, and everyone knew it. The carrier entered the Caribbean on November 16th. 2 days later, it was operating miles from Venezuelan territorial waters. Strike capability, immediate. Venezuelan radar tracked every aircraft launch. Air defense batteries powered up. Fighter jets prepared for scramble orders. The question wasn't if the U.S. could strike Venezuela. The question was whether they would. To understand what happened next, you need to know what led up to the Ford's arrival. September 2025. That's when everything changed. A speedboat in the Caribbean. The U.S. military identified it as a drug trafficking vessel operated by Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang the administration had designated as a terrorist organization. An MQ-9 Reaper drone tracked it. Then came the strike. 11 people killed instantly. President Trump announced it from the White House. He said the vessel was loaded with narcotics headed for American streets. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed. The boat was operated by designated narco-terrorists. The administration's position was clear. These weren't law enforcement operations anymore. This was armed conflict against foreign terrorist organizations. And it kept happening. 22 strikes over the next 2 months. 83 people killed. The Pentagon said every target was carrying drugs for cartels designated as terrorists. Critics, including the UN and several Latin American countries, questioned the strikes. They asked, where's the evidence? Where's the due process? The administration's answer, we're in armed conflict with terrorist organizations. The intelligence is classified. The strikes are legal under that framework. Two completely different views of the same operations. October brought more attacks. 3 boats in a single day, then 5 vessels in 12 hours. Each time, the Pentagon released the same statement. Vessels were on known trafficking routes operated by terrorist organizations carrying narcotics toward the United States. Each time, Venezuelan officials condemned the operations as violations of international law. Who was right? Depends on who you ask. Because while the debate raged over boat strikes, the U.S. was positioning something far bigger. The Ford's arrival wasn't just about drug interdiction. It was a demonstration of capability. Now the U.S. had a floating air base within striking distance of Venezuela's capital. Flight time to Caracas, under 15 minutes. The boat strikes had tested Venezuelan response times and coastal defenses. The Ford represented the next level, the ability to strike anywhere in Venezuela within minutes. Russia issued carefully worded statements about regional stability and serious consequences. China said nothing publicly. But Chinese military advisors remained in Caracas, and that silence spoke volumes. Venezuela wasn't facing the United States alone. It had backing from 2 major powers who saw this crisis through their own strategic lens. Was this about stopping drugs, or was it about regime change? The administration insisted counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism operations only. Venezuelan officials claimed this is preparation for invasion. Both sides had evidence to support their view. Both sides believed they were right. The Ford's Air Wing conducted daily flight operations, training exercises officially, but everyone understood the message. Venezuelan pilots sat on alert. 200,000 troops maintained defensive positions. Coastal radar operated around the clock. Both sides were ready for whatever came next. But here's what nobody expected. Venezuela knew they couldn't win a conventional war against the United States, but they didn't need to win. They just needed to make it cost more than America was willing to pay, and they had the weapons to do it. Su-30 Mk2 fighters armed with Kh-31A anti-ship missiles designed specifically to kill aircraft carriers. Speed, Mach 3.5. Range, 160 miles. Warhead, 200 pounds of high explosive. One missile probably couldn't sink the Ford, but 12 missiles launched in a coordinated attack? Different story. Venezuela's air defenses added another problem. Russian S-300 systems could engage aircraft at 90 miles out. Not enough to stop an American air campaign, but enough to shoot down some planes. And that's what mattered to Venezuela: American casualties. The American public would accept strikes on drug boats. They wouldn't accept dozens of dead pilots over a country most Americans couldn't locate on a map. Venezuela's strategy wasn't about winning battles. It was about making the war politically unwinnable for the U.S. They also had Chinese-supplied C-802 coastal missiles, mobile launchers that could fire and relocate before counterstrikes arrived. And Venezuela had one more advantage: geography. Dense jungle, major cities with millions of civilians, mountain ranges perfect for guerrilla warfare. If U.S. forces invaded, this wouldn't be like Iraq. American technological superiority matters less when you're fighting in terrain that favors the defender. Pentagon war games showed the same result every time. Yes, the U.S. would win eventually, but casualties would be high, the war would drag on for years, and the political cost would be massive. As November turned into December, something unexpected happened. Nothing. The Ford kept patrolling. Venezuelan troops stayed on alert, but no shots were fired. No airstrikes, no invasion, no escalation. The reason reveals everything about modern military power. The Ford wasn't there to start a war. It was there to win one without firing a shot. Military strategists call it deterrence through presence. Show overwhelming force, position it close enough to act immediately, but never actually use it. Every day the Ford stayed off Venezuela's coast drained resources. 200,000 troops on maximum alert meant Venezuela's military budget was bleeding money. Fuel, overtime pay, equipment maintenance, food and supplies. Venezuela's economy, already hammered by sanctions and mismanagement, couldn't sustain this level of readiness for long. Meanwhile, the Ford operated normally. Nuclear reactors meant unlimited power. Supply ships brought fresh provisions. Crew operated on regular schedules. The U.S. could maintain this for months. Venezuela couldn't. Political pressure was building inside Venezuela. Military officers questioned preparing for an unwinnable war. Citizens wondered why their government was risking everything. Maduro faced a choice: back down and look weak, or escalate and risk destruction. The Ford's presence gave him a third option: maintain the standoff while quietly signaling willingness to talk. This wasn't about regime change through invasion. It was about applying economic and military pressure until Venezuela's position became untenable. Force Maduro to choose between negotiation and collapse. The Ford was a $13 billion chess piece, positioned perfectly to control the board without making a move.
As of late November 2025, the standoff continues. The Ford is still in the Caribbean. Venezuelan forces remain mobilized. Both sides maintain ready postures, but the intensity has dropped. Behind-the-scenes channels opened. Not official negotiations, both governments denied talks were happening, but back-channel communications through third parties. Washington's message: reduce your military threat, stop facilitating drug trafficking, and we'll draw down. Caracas's message: guarantee no invasion, lift some sanctions, and we'll cooperate. Neither side could publicly admit to negotiating, but both were looking for an off-ramp. And the boat strikes? They stopped. No announcement, no policy change, but after the Ford arrived, the strikes quietly ended. The Pentagon got what it wanted, demonstrating capability without triggering full-scale war. Venezuela got what it wanted, showing it wouldn't back down under pressure. Both sides claimed victory. Both avoided disaster. But the long-term implications are just starting. What happened in November 2025 established a new pattern for how superpowers apply military force, not through invasion, not through occupation, through presence, through demonstration, through credible threats that never quite turn into actual combat. The Ford will eventually leave. Venezuelan troops will stand down. Things will return to normal. But everyone will remember what happened when a $13 billion carrier parked off Venezuela's coast. And next time there's a crisis in the Western Hemisphere, both sides will remember how this one ended, with nobody winning, nobody losing, and both sides walking away alive. That's what really happened when Venezuela mobilized 200,000 troops against America's most powerful warship. Not with explosions, not with invasion, but with a standoff that showed how modern power really works. If you want more military analysis that cuts through the headlines, hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Should the U.S. have taken stronger action? Or was the carrier presence the right call? See you in the next one.